World Affairs Roundup next on International Focus.
The Institute of World Affairs at UWM and Milwaukee Public Television present International Focus, a global magazine linking Wisconsin and the world.
Welcome to International Focus. I'm Rob Ricigliano, Director of the Institute of World Affairs at UWM, with another edition of our World Affairs Roundup. Today we'll be looking at enriching discussion. Negotiators from the U.S., Britain, France, China, Russia, and Germany, the so-called 5+1 nations, met with their Iranian counterparts in Geneva to discuss Iran's growing nuclear program. Will engagement pay off, or simply buy Tehran more time? From 8 to 20, as the G20 summit in Pittsburgh concluded, participants announced the larger forum would replace the G8 as the primary venue to discuss global economic issues. Britain's Gordon Brown declared the gathering had ushered in a new system of international economic cooperation. Will more seats at the table promote consensus or conflict? Sweet and sour. Seeking to preserve warming relations with Beijing, Taiwan decided this year to forego its annual request to join the UN. At the same time, a delegation from Taipei was in the U.S. looking to buy advanced F-16 fighter jets to defend against attack by the mainland, a deal Beijing opposes. How do U.S. relations with the island impact Obama's China policy? The hombre who came to dinner, deposed Honduran President Manuel Zelaya, raised the stakes in his quest to return to office by noisily taking refuge in the Brazilian embassy in his nation's capital. What do the various responses to the crisis reveal about relations within the region and U.S. Latin American policy? For a closer look at these stories, we're once again joined by John Katzka, a retired U.S. Foreign Service officer who has conducted public diplomacy for the Department of State on 4 continents. Ann Hamilton, political scientist and coordinator of international studies at UW-Whitewater, who also served in the U.S. Foreign Service. And Robert Kraig, author of a number of articles and books dealing with the history and politics of American foreign policy. He currently serves as the executive director of Citizen Action of Wisconsin. Welcome back to the Roundup.
Thank you.
John, I wonder if we could start with you on Iran. Now, the talks seem to have resulted in some progress, that Iran said it would give up most of its enriched uranium stock and to be reprocessed outside the country. It would allow inspections of the facility in Qum. Is this a different chapter in those negotiations?
Yes, it's a different chapter, but it's a very long book. We have been down this road before, and again, I think the important points about this one is that there was less, the decibel level was much lower as they went through this particular set of meetings. But the complications are there as well. We have enlarged the number of countries involved in the decision-making process to the permanent members of the Security Council. Well, we have a good track record as to where those people are on a number of issues. China and Russia, whenever you talk about interference in internal affairs, automatically put up the veto sign. Germany has very complicated relations with Russia and very useful economic relations with Iran. So it also has agenda items that it has to take care of. The U.S., speaking through the Assistant Secretary Vershbow, Sandy Vershbow was ambassador in Moscow at one time, gave a release that we are going to put this item on the table until the end of the year, and with the hopes that we'll be able to resolve some of these issues amongst the permanent members as well as between us and the Iranians.
And is this, as John referenced the long book, and President Obama has tried to rewrite not a new chapter, maybe a new edition, I don't know. Does this represent some progress in that the Obama's initiative to re-engage with Iran?
I think so. I think that we need to move beyond a time when, the fact that they encounter each other in the hallway is the news, or that the Iranian foreign minister visits Washington, because there are a lot of issues. I know that just because we don't have relations with them, that doesn't mean that we haven't been talking with others about the issues and with Iranians, but the engagement is very positive. I think it's very positive to be doing it with the people who are in the countries that are in the P5+1. And I think it's also very positive to ensure that the engagement keeps Iran in the NPT, in the Non-Proliferation Treaty, because some people were saying, we're going to withdraw from the Non-Proliferation Treaty regime, and that I think would be have very negative consequences.
Remember the Iranians, some are saying this is a genuine move on their part. Some are saying it could just be a smokescreen to buy more time, and that the impact of the elections in Iran is not softened the Iranian regime, but actually hardened them in some respects. What do you see as the link between this series of negotiations and the disputed election just a few months ago?
Well, there were some who thought this would make them much more intransigent, and there are others who thought that it would make them more willing to compromise. What we know is that their public move was to seem conciliatory this week. We don't know what their actual end game is. But as far as the overall context, I think Obama administration is trying to start not a new chapter, but a new testament on Iranian relations, to get even more religious here. And you have to give that time, that engagement. They've tried to engage them differently. They're still very sensitive. I mean, just Ahmadinejad complained that he didn't get a response to his congratulatory letter when Obama got elected, things of that kind. But he's going to have to try. You have to give this a chance and try to engage them for over a long period of time, because the upside is tremendous for regional security if you can get Iran more into the community of nations. And it's also huge because of the huge proliferation threat that's involved.
And some would say, given that President Obama is currently wrestling with Afghan policy and a very big decision or set of decisions in front of him, and Iran is also a player in Afghanistan, John. So is Iran just being cagey here, or are they genuinely trying to engage?
You must have been reading my mind, because I was going to talk about the fact that Iran was very important to us in the initial phase in Afghanistan. We had very successful negotiations with the Iranians about our throwing out the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. So admittedly, that was a reformist government there, not the same one that's currently in power. But there is a possibility of engaging, and hopefully we'll get to that point.
Well, let me. I want to switch to another topic of potentially new levels of engagement, which is the G20, and there were several things that came out of that summit. But Robert, I wanted to maybe start with you for some thoughts on the shift from the G8 to the G20. So a small group, select group of 8 wealthy nations to this larger group of 20. And to continue, I guess, the literary metaphor here, is this a brave new world, or is this?
It is symbolically important, and of course, literature is symbolic, at least. So, it's another marquee element of Obama's break in foreign policy. There's going to be a more multilateral world. So of course you have to have more actors involved, and you have to have more actors that reflect the actual distribution of economic power. There are a lot of actors in the G8 who are no longer as powerful as they were in the past, and there are rising countries, especially the BRIC nations, that are much more involved now with G20 and others.
Brazil, India, Russia,
China. India, China, right? Yeah. So. Thank you, John. You don't get caught in acronyms. And there's symbolism here also when they chose Pittsburgh, which got some derision, even though I got my undergraduate degree at the University of Pittsburgh. But it's actually a very nice city that has done the post-industrial transformation very well. So they want to send that symbolism of this new 21st century world. Whether or not it will lead to a new world or not, you can't tell by simply the agreements that were reached. There's a lot of discussions about changing the global financial order and preventing a lot of the risk-taking that took place before, but there isn't that much teeth to that, and the United States is kind of an anchor on that. In fact, in Congress, real financial reform is on the run. The bankers are winning in a lot of respects, and so the U.S. is trying to hold off on that. Global warming is probably the biggest issue imaginable, even though it didn't get the headlines. Not much progress on that, but a lot of declarations at Copenhagen in December that they'll start to do something real, but that's also very difficult for the U.S. and a lot of other actors. So it is an important step towards moving towards that world. You have to make this gesture. You have to expand to a G20, but there's a whole lot of hard work that needs to be done to actually create that consensus. And it's not quite there yet, but it's a step in that direction.
And what did you see in the results that came out of this meeting? Was it on par for past meetings? Was it a disappointment? Was it a success?
Well, people were saying, the news report said that not much was accomplished. I mean, except for changing from the G8 to the G20 and some of the shares, the quotas in the IMF, giving some more power to the emerging economies. But if you read the 23-page report that came out of it, it's evident that they've been working on a lot of different aspects in some detail. There are parallels here with the Iran story in that the fact that they're getting together at the table is important to the fact that it's just the beginning chapter in a very long book is also similar, because this is the start of a very long process.
For want of a metaphor. It's at this point, I think it's a very useful discussion group. If you look at the way in which the G20 took on the economic financial crisis, there was a lot of discussion, and individual countries made decisions as to how they were going to proceed. So it is more akin to the General Assembly than it is to the Security Council at this point.
Well, but I mean, Robert, you listed a couple of several issues there that this group of nations, in whatever form, whether it's as a G20 or another forum, is really critical to. So the continuing the recovery, reining in or regulating the financial sector, climate change, et cetera. But they didn't really come out that strongly on those issues.
Yeah, they made statements that they all wanted to work on these things. There were statements about curbing excessive executive compensation, for example, and curbing risk-taking. It's hard to see with the mechanisms they have, the tools they have now, that you could regulate that internationally very well. It'd be great if they could. So you're back to individual countries, and as I say, the United States doesn't seem to be moving towards strong regulation of the risk-taking. There was a lot of investment, stimulus money to try to prevent the emergency economies from totally collapsing and the most impoverished countries during this downturn. And so that was something that's been successful, relatively successful. There's also more of an emphasis on Africa and some of the poorest countries and trying to invest more in them. But it's really very much in the early stages. It's hard to see whether there really is a G20 consensus. There might have been a G8 consensus at some point. There was a Bretton Woods system at some point where there was a consensus, but it isn't a new Bretton Woods yet.
Agreed.
So we're not seeing a rebirth or a replacement of that necessarily?
Well, if we look at the way in which these international organizations came into being, it was on the basis of a crisis. It remains to be seen whether this crisis, this financial crisis, is large enough to be able to cause the kinds of gut-wrenching change. So far, it suggests that it hasn't been. And if not, well, World War I and World War II produced the two successive international changes that we saw with the League of Nations and the United Nations.
Well, I mean, and is this? Some would say, well, what's the big story here in the sense that the G8 expanding out? This is a symbolic issue, but is it different if we get? I mean, maybe this explains why we don't have an outcome as strong as we might have, is because you do have Brazil at the table with the United States and Great Britain and China and Russia and so on. Is this a workable form, I guess, is my concern? I mean, will they be able to bridge those differences?
I differ a little bit. I think it is really important, and I think the reason it's important is not only because now they've brought 90% of the world's economies together in one place. It's a sense of, now the other economies have this stake, and they have to participate, and they have to, contribute more, and I think that it's not. There's a psychological aspect, but it's also really important to bring them into the decision-making process and make them feel a part of the outcomes, and that's really important. I mean, they stand, they can't just sit back and blame the system.
Okay, I'll change my mind. It's an important discussion group.
Maybe it's not a new system, but it's a new commitment to create such a system. You could say that.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's leave it there. We'll take a quick break on International Focus. We'll be right back in just a moment on International Focus.
The Institute of World Affairs presents our community with a range of public programs relating to global issues, U.S. foreign policy, and the world economy. For more information about the Institute of World Affairs, call 414-229-3220 or visit our website at www.iwa.uwm.edu.
Welcome back to International Focus and our World Affairs Roundup. We're talking with John Katzka, Ann Hamilton, and Robert Kraig. We hit Iran and the G20 before the break, Ann, and I want to start off with Taiwan, China, and the U.S. And it seems as though a cynic might say Taiwan really didn't give up all that much by not asking for membership to the UN that they weren't going to get anyway. And then on the other hand, they asked for a great deal, which was a fleet of F-16s from the United States.
Right. I think we have to see this in a larger context. First of all, they asked for the F-16s a long time ago, and President Bush had actually turned them down because he didn't want to aggravate our relations with China. And they are making some movement. I mean, they are getting some results by trying to participate in UN agencies as observers, for example, in the World Health Organization. The results of asking for UN membership were known. I mean, they'd gone through the routine before. So, and they have a different president who's got a very different policy towards China. I mean, he has said no unification, no use of force. Can't remember what the third no is. No unification, no use of force. Well, there's another no. Anyway, but it's all about rapprochement with China without dwelling on sovereignty issues, and it's a very practical approach, emphasizing economic ties and not going into the symbolic areas. So, as long as those relationships that relationship is getting much better, they weren't going to gain anything by going to the UN. I don't think that they're necessarily going to get the F-16s from President Obama either. Certainly not before his November visit to Beijing.
That raises another issue, John, which is that this is in some ways a very poorly timed request from the perspective of the Obama administration, because they're about to go to China, and if the Taiwanese really are interested in improving their relationship with China, it seems like they're doing a lot to complicate the U.S. relationship with China.
Well, countries look at the world from their own perspective. So what we would see as a very bad timing for them to come into a request may have a very different perspective from their point of view. I don't see this going anywhere. I can't imagine if George W. Bush was not prepared to give them the jets that the Obama administration. There is so little upside for us in terms of giving them the planes. I mean, let's be realistic about this. What kind of parity are they going to have with the Chinese military? I mean, maybe we need the arms sales as a way in which to be able to buck up the economy, but other than that, I can't see any purpose served by it.
Robert, how different is this the new President Ma's policy toward China? Again, it can be read as he's giving up some symbolic things which he wasn't going to get anyway. On the other hand, those symbols do mean things, and is that a significant change in the tone?
I think it's very significant both in terms of Taiwanese politics and in terms of their politics with the mainland. The previous president was tweaking China, saying that they need to be independent and doing everything he could to push that case, which is a very strong part of Taiwanese public opinion. So this current leader actually winning was a major change in Taiwanese politics, and he can be attacked from the other side if he seems to be giving away sovereignty. In fact, he's in a birther sort of way, he's been accused of not being a real Taiwanese by the, I guess you would call it the right in Taiwan. So he is walking a line where he wants to preserve their independence without rubbing China's nose in it. China has allowed them to be quasi-independent, de facto independent all along for some time, but doesn't want any absolute explicit recognition of independence at all. And so that's the dividing line. They can't afford to completely antagonize China. I mean, they have universal national service. I know a lot of Taiwanese graduate students went through national service, so they're like in a war footing, thinking they could be invaded to some degree in Taiwan. The U.S. can't afford to offend China over this, despite all the strong ties between Taiwan and the United States, which are significant and which create a lot of sympathy.
Were significant.
Well, I guess that's my question, John, is has this issue, given the interconnectedness of the global economy, let alone the U.S. and the Chinese economy, kind of made this issue, has it been overtaken by events? In other words,
I think so. I think that there are still groups in the United States who have a very strong connection and tie. Much of it is emotional. If you look at the facts, it's hard to argue a case. It reminds me of another set of relationships. If Serbia would have been as strong and as powerful as China, or imagine what we would have done about Kosovo.
Interesting. Right. And I want to switch us down to Latin America and talk a little bit about Honduras. And this is it's a story that's sort of flown beneath the headlines and the news. but it's a rather interesting storyline. You have a president is deposed in what the U.S. is calling a coup. He is able to sneak back into the country and take up residence at the Brazilian embassy, and he, from the embassy, is able to sort of rally supporters, and there's been violence and demonstrations and so on. It seems fairly unprecedented. What's the significance of these events and how they're unfolding?
Well, one of the issues here is the Latin American reaction to the relations between Latin American countries. One of Zelaya, the president who was deposed, was an ally of Hugo Chavez of Venezuela, and so that's where some of the hostility comes in. But the Latin American countries have all rallied around him, not necessarily because they like him or they like his policies, but because of the fact that he was deposed in this way. And Lula said it very well. We fought for many years to get out of the trash bin of history, of these military coups, and we're not going back there. So it's a sensitive issue for all of these countries, whether they're on the right or on the left, and they don't like the fact that Chavez is gaining from this, but they are all supporting the coming out against the coup because of the way it threatens the democratic process, and very strongly on that. Even though there are people in Brazil who are upset because they're letting him stay in the embassy and all. When you get down to what it's really about, it's about the integrity of the democratic process.
Well, there's currently all these countries, including the United States, have come out against the holding of elections while Zelaya is deposed. And Robert, there's been an interesting sort of backstory to this involving the conservative members of Congress in the United States supporting the de facto government, the coup implementers in Honduras, and telling them to hold on.
Absolutely. Now, part of it it's interesting is that if we were still in the Bush era, they probably would have sided with the Heritage Foundation, with Senator DeMint from South Carolina. Right-wing forces in the United States have been supporting those who prepared the coup. They're connected to the business interests in Honduras. And Obama has sided with Latin American consensus, which is a change. You talk about different kind of foreign policy where we are actually aligned with the rest of Latin America and immediately calling it a coup and calling this government illegitimate. The other thing is that when Zelaya actually came and met with Senator Clinton, turns out, by the way, they've hired as a lobbyist the people who did the coup, one of people closest to Bill Clinton, Lanny Davis, which is interesting. They're lobbyists who you can buy for anything, it appears. But he actually put it in terms of the healthcare debate. He said that those who do not want health insurance here in the United States are the same as those who don't want to pay a living wage in Honduras. So this is straight kind of Chavez-like populism brought right to the United States in the middle of our top domestic issue debate. So I thought that was fascinating and plays very well in most of Latin America, I would say.
Boy, does that give populism a bad name. Brazil's role in this whole thing shows even more how much more of an important player it is becoming in the hemisphere. In fact, I see the U.S. not really developing a strong Latin American policy in the near term because of distractions elsewhere, but increasingly working with Brazil in terms of what the policy for Latin America should be.
We've gone through our paces, and it's time to turn it back to you all in terms of are there any stories that you've had your eye on, either that have been happening or you think will be happening that you want to call our attention to? John,
I'm going to go with the German elections. Merkel is back with a stronger right-of-center coalition, and watch for her to show increasing independence from the EU and from Washington, and mindful of its careful relationship with Russia.
Interesting. Anne?
The fact that Obama was giving so many important foreign policy speeches last week, and just the importance of the whole non-proliferation issue and the shift in U.S. policy there. I think that's fascinating to watch it unfold.
Well, he came under a little bit of fire for going to Copenhagen to lobby for Chicago getting the Olympic Games, which it didn't. But then he also met with General McChrystal for 25 minutes there. Has he been too active, I guess, is the question, on the foreign policy front?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, it boggles the mind to think of how many different topics he had to deal with over those last few days. And
Presidents have to be engaged when there are results. And they're not there for exploratory discussions. They're there to conclude. And he may be overextending himself.
And then it's hard to ignore Afghanistan this week. And General McChrystal wants a lot more troops. I think Obama's at that Lyndon Johnson position.
It's a lot more between, say, 10 and 45,000 is the word.
Yeah. But I think we're at, particularly given the base of the Democratic Party, and it's a very different party than Bush's party, obviously, that it's Johnson's kind of decision. Obama is having a very aggressive domestic agenda, just like Johnson did the Great Society. If he gets bogged down in a Vietnam-like war, and Afghanistan is a comparable place that no one's ever won a war in, it could be devastating to his presidency. So he has very, very hard decisions in Afghanistan, and it's going to be hard for him to keep his party unified and to further escalate.
Agreed.
Well, and he's got different constituencies. A lot of the conservatives and the Republicans would support his troop movement and would criticize a withdrawal of troops, but then would be on the other side of the issue when it comes to healthcare or climate change.
Actually, I see the wings bifurcating in that there are some on the right are promoting greater troop, some are against it. So it's evolving.
Well, John Katzka, Ann Hamilton, Robert Kraig, thank you very much for another World Affairs Roundup. And to our viewers, we'll see you next week on International Focus.